My name is Elias Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and right now I'm standing in the middle of a warehouse in Austin, Texas, that used to be an abandoned furniture factory. And today, it's the flagship location of a woodworking company that ships handcrafted furniture to 38 states. People call it a success story. I call it survival with a price tag. There's a journalist coming tomorrow to photograph me next to the showroom pieces. There's a spread in a regional magazine. There's a team of 11 people who depend on me for paychecks. There's a life here, real, breathing, mine, that I built with tools I taught myself to use in a garage the size of a closet. And none of it, stopped my phone from ringing that morning and taking me completely apart. It started at 7:14 a.m. I know the time because I had just unlocked the workshop and set my coffee on the edge of the work table. The morning light was coming through the high factory windows, that particular shade of amber that only exists in October, and I was thinking about a walnut dining table I needed to finish by Friday. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go. It buzzed again. I turned it face down. By the time I had pulled on my apron and picked up a piece of sandpaper, it had rung 4 more times from 4 different numbers I didn't recognize. Except that wasn't entirely true. I didn't have the numbers saved, but somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere in the place the body stores what the mind tries to release, I recognized them anyway. My hands slowed. The sandpaper went still. And for a moment, I was not a 34-year-old man standing in a warehouse he owned. I was a 9-year-old boy with a green duffel bag, sitting in a hard plastic chair under fluorescent lights that buzzed like they were angry about something, waiting for people who had already decided not to come back. I set the sandpaper down. I did not pick up the phone. I went back to work. Because that's what you do when you've spent a lifetime learning that the people who hurt you don't get to interrupt the life you built without them. But I want to tell you something. Even after all of it, even after everything I'm about to share with you, that phone ringing still had the power to make my hands shake. And I think that's important to say out loud. Because this is not a story about a man who got over it. This is a story about a man who got through it. And there is a difference so wide, you could build a life inside it. Before I tell you what happened when I finally answered, and I did, eventually, answer, tell me something first. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? I want to know how far this reaches before I open the door to the rest of it. Because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that changes shape depending on who's hearing it. Some of you are going to recognize pieces of this. Some of you are going to feel things you thought you had already finished feeling. And some of you are going to text someone you love before this is over. I hope it's that last one. We lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in a beige 2-story house on a street where all the houses looked almost identical, and the differences were in the small things. Whose front porch had chairs, whose yard had a garden, whose driveway had 2 cars or 1. Ours had 1. My father's name was Gerald. He worked civilian logistics for a military contractor and wore the same 4 rotation of button-downs so reliably that I could tell what day of the week it was by his shirt. He was not a warm man in the way some fathers are warm, the kind who throw their arms around you and make noise about how much they love you. His warmth was quieter. He built things: bookshelves, a deck in the backyard, a treehouse in the oak tree that only got halfway finished before he ran out of weekends and ambition at the same time. He taught me the names of tools before I started first grade. That matters later. My mother's name was Patricia. Everyone called her Patty, though I noticed she only let certain people get away with it. She was the social one, the one who remembered neighbors' birthdays, who brought food to families after funerals, who made every room slightly louder and warmer just by being in it. She sold real estate part-time and volunteered at the school library on Thursdays. She laughed easily. That's the hardest part to hold on to now. How easily she laughed. My older brother Marcus was 4 years ahead of me. He was the son my father understood. Good with numbers, reliable, already the kind of teenager who asked adults reasonable questions and got called mature for it. Marcus and my father had a language between them. Sports scores, car mechanics, logistics humor I was too young to decode. They made sense to each other in that wordless way some people do. My younger sister Ruby was 5 years behind me. She was all noise and motion, the kind of child who narrated everything she did as she did it, who left a trail of crayons and cracker crumbs and elaborate stuffed animal arrangements wherever she went. My mother called her a force of nature, and she said it the way people say things they mean completely. And then there was me, Elias, in the middle, old enough to understand more than they thought I did, young enough to believe that understanding would protect me from what was coming. It did not. I want to describe our family at its best, because I think it matters. I think you need to know that it wasn't always a story with a wound in it. Saturday mornings smelled like maple syrup and coffee grounds and the particular kind of silence that only exists when a whole house is still waking up slowly. Marcus would come downstairs with his hair ridiculous and read cereal box trivia out loud to nobody in particular. Ruby would drag her blanket into the kitchen and sit on it in the middle of the floor like a small queen on a very soft throne. My father made eggs the same way every time. Too much butter, slightly overdone, and never once seemed to notice. My mother drank her coffee standing at the counter, looking out the window at the backyard with an expression I couldn't read then. I can read it now. It was the expression of someone calculating how long the good part lasts. We were not wealthy, but we were not struggling. Not yet. There were vacations to Myrtle Beach. There were decent Christmases. There were Friday nights with rented movies and popcorn burned just slightly at the bottom of the pot, and my father pretending he didn't fall asleep 15 minutes in. There was, for a time, enough. Enough love, enough stability, enough of the ordinary things that children translate as permanent. Then my father's company lost a federal contract. He came home the Tuesday it happened and sat in his truck in the driveway for 22 minutes before coming inside. I know because I was doing homework at the front window and I watched him without understanding what I was watching. He didn't say anything at dinner. My mother looked at him with that calculation in her eyes again. By the end of the week, the house had a new temperature. Cooler. Like someone had cracked a window and didn't want to admit it. My father found consulting work, then lost it. Found something part-time, then found reasons not to discuss how it was going. My mother picked up more listings, stayed on the phone longer in the evenings, started holding her coffee cup with both hands like she needed something to grip. The arguments started small. They always do. Did you call the bank? I told you I would handle it. You said that last week. I said I would handle it, Patty. Then they grew. Not louder at first, just longer. Later into the night. Bleeding further under doors and through walls and into the ears of a child who was lying very still in the dark, listening to every word he wasn't supposed to hear. My father started going to a friend's house some evenings. He called it clearing his head. My mother called it something different, but only on the nights she thought I wasn't listening. Marcus retreated into himself. Ruby got quieter, which was wrong in a way that was hard to explain, like watching a clock stop. A child that loud going silent is a bad sign. I became the one who managed the mood of whatever room I was in, lightened things when they got heavy, disappeared when the air got too charged, watched and waited, and learned to read the temperature of every moment before I walked into it. I was 9 years old. That should not have been my job. They told us about the separation on a Sunday afternoon. They sat us at the kitchen table, the one with the scratch on the corner from when Ruby had pushed a toy car off the edge and neither of them bothered to sand it smooth. They sat across from us with the particular stillness of people who have rehearsed something many times and are still not ready to say it. My father spoke first. My mother kept her hands flat on the table. They said it wasn't working. They said they still loved each of us completely. They said families could change shape and still be families. They said it was no one's fault. All the things adults say when they have decided something and want the children in the room to absorb it without falling apart. Ruby started crying immediately, the kind of crying that's mostly confusion. She didn't fully understand what was being described, only that it sounded like loss. My mother pulled her into her side. Marcus stared at the scratch on the table corner, and I waited. I waited for my name. I waited for, and Elias will be with. It didn't come. The conversation moved around logistics the way water moves around rocks, finding the easiest path, avoiding the obstacles. My mother would take an apartment across town. My father was looking at options. Schools needed to be considered. Who could handle what? I sat very still and waited for my name. It still didn't come. That night, I heard them through the wall. My father said something had to be figured out. My mother said she could barely manage the move and one child. My father said he wasn't in a position for more than Ruby right now. Then my mother said the sentence. She didn't say it cruelly. That might have been easier to carry. She said it in a voice that sounded tired and practical and almost logical. The way you'd talk about furniture you couldn't fit in a moving truck. She said, Elias is resilient. He can go to Millbrook House temporarily while we get sorted. He'll be okay. He's always okay. Always okay. I was 9. I had never told anyone I was okay. I had just been good at pretending. And they had mistaken the performance for the truth. 3 days later, my father drove me there. My mother had packed my green duffel bag the night before. She folded some things, stuffed others, forgot my good sneakers, the blue ones, though I didn't realize that until I was already inside. The drive took 40 minutes. My father had the radio on, country station, low. Neither of us spoke. Once, at a red light, he reached over and squeezed my shoulder. He didn't look at me when he did it. I stared out the window at a gas station, a grocery store, a woman pushing a stroller. All these ordinary pieces of the world moving past like they had no idea anything terrible was happening. They didn't. That's the thing about private grief. It's invisible from the outside. Millbrook House had a stone facade and a painted wooden sign and 2 oak trees out front that were beautiful in a way that felt almost insulting. There were flowers near the entrance. Someone had tried hard to make it look less like what it was. A woman named Ms. Carey met us in the lobby. She had kind eyes and the practiced warmth of someone who spent every day meeting children in the worst moment of their young lives. My father filled out papers. I sat in a chair with my green duffel bag on my lap. He signed things. He talked to Ms. Carey in a low voice about contact information and temporary placement length and expectations for review. Then he came and stood in front of me. He crouched down. He was at my eye level, which felt strange because he was a tall man, and I was not used to looking directly at his face from that angle. He said, "It's just for a little while, Elle. While everything gets figured out, you're going to be fine." I looked at him. I did not ask, "What does a little while mean?" I did not ask, "Why isn't Marcus here too?" I did not ask, "Why is it me?" I already knew those questions had no answer he was willing to give me. He stood up. He picked up the pen he had set on the chair beside him. He handed it to Ms. Carey. He looked at me one more time, just once, briefly, like looking too long might cost him something. Then he walked out. The door closed. The lobby was very quiet. I looked down at my green duffel bag. I had packed my sketchbook, my colored pencils, 3 books, 2 changes of clothes my mother had grabbed from my drawer. No blue sneakers. I thought, he said a little while. I thought, a little while isn't long. I thought, I should stay close to the door so I can hear them when they come back. That was the child I still was then. Not angry, not broken. Still waiting. Millbrook House had 31 residents the week I arrived. I know because I counted them at dinner that first night, going around the tables the way you count things when you need something to do with your mind that doesn't involve feeling. My room had 5 boys, 2 bunk beds and 1 cot. The cot was mine. The boy in the bottom bunk nearest me was named Darnell. He was 11, which seemed ancient to me at the time. He told me on my first night, not unkindly, just factually, that the first week was always the hardest, that everybody went through the same thing, that the food on Thursdays was somehow worse than every other day, and that if I cried at night, it was better to do it quietly because some of the older boys would make things hard for you if they knew. He had been at Millbrook for 14 months. 14 months. I thought about a little while and tried to do the math in a way that came out to something smaller. It didn't. The first week I sat near the front window of the common room every afternoon. The window faced the parking lot. I told myself I just liked the light. I was lying. Every time a car turned in, I felt something lift in my chest, some involuntary, humiliating hope that lived underneath every rational thought I tried to hold. Every time it was a staff member's car, or a volunteer's van, or someone else's family arriving for someone else's visit, that thing in my chest sank back down a little lower than it had been before. By the end of the second week, Ms. Carey stopped using the phrase, "when your family gets things sorted," and started saying, "we'll see how things develop." There is an entire world of meaning in that shift. One phrase means a door that's temporarily closed. The other means they are starting to wonder if there is a door at all. I understood the difference even then. I just wasn't ready to let it land. My caseworker was a woman named Ms. Adeze Obi. She wore her hair natural and had earrings that changed every time I saw her. Long silver ones, red hoops, small gold studs. And I always noticed them because they were the most variable thing in an environment that was aggressively consistent. She asked me about school, my favorite subjects, what I liked to do. I told her I liked drawing. She asked if I liked building things. I thought about my father's half-finished treehouse and said yes, I liked building things. She nodded and wrote something down. She never asked me the real question, the one that sat between us in every meeting like a third person nobody acknowledged. She never asked, "Why do you think they left you and not your brother, not your sister?" She left space for it, but I wasn't ready to fill that space with words, so I didn't. She called my parents regularly. She left messages. She sent forms. She told me they were both going through transitions, that contact was pending, that everything was in process. Process. That word. Adults use process when they want to make something cruel sound administrative. I learned later, much later, that my mother had found an apartment and enrolled Marcus in a new school within 3 weeks of dropping me off. That my father had moved in with a friend, found new work, and was keeping Ruby in her original school district by driving 40 minutes each way. That both of them had, within a month, reconstructed versions of family that functioned and moved forward. Without me. I was not a casualty of their collapse. I was a decision. That is a distinction that took me years to say clearly. Millbrook had rules the way all institutional places have rules. Not cruel, just relentless. Wake up, make your bed tight enough for the corner to hold, line up for breakfast, finish your tray, attend class, afternoon activities, dinner, 2 hours of free time, lights out. Structure is not the worst thing for a child in grief. The worst thing is the space inside the structure. The space where ordinary family life would be. The homework nobody helps you with at the kitchen table. The dinner where no one asks what you learned today. The evening where the TV is on in a room full of strangers rather than a room full of the 3 specific people whose voices you could identify from any part of any house you'd ever lived in. I missed the sound of my mother laughing at something that wasn't actually funny. I missed Marcus telling me I was annoying as a form of affection. I missed Ruby demanding that I watch her perform elaborate dances for an audience of exactly 1. I missed the scratch on the corner of the kitchen table. I missed the particular smell of my father's truck, oil and coffee, and something mechanical I never learned the name of. I missed being known. That's what nobody prepares you for. Not just missing people, missing the version of yourself that existed in their presence. Because identity at 9 is not something you carry alone. It lives in how the people around you say your name. And now nobody here said my name the way that meant, "You are ours." One afternoon, a boy named Curtis sat next to me in the common room while I was drawing in my sketchbook. He looked over my shoulder at what I was making, a rough drawing of a chair, the kind my father might have built, with the joints visible and the proportions slightly off. He said, "Your family coming back for you?" I said, "Yeah, they're just getting sorted out." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Mine said 3 weeks. I've been here 8 months." He didn't say it to scare me. He said it the way you hand someone a tool they're going to need, practically because you know something they don't yet. I closed my sketchbook. I did not go back to the window that afternoon, but I listened for footsteps. That night, after lights out, I lay on my cot with my face turned toward the wall and pressed my fist against my mouth and felt something move through me that was too large and too old for a 9-year-old boy's body. I did not make a sound. By the time my birthday passed, no card, no call, no voice I recognized saying my name. Something had completed its shift inside me. Not hardness exactly, not yet. More like recalibration. A slow internal adjustment to a new reality, the way a compass finds north when you stop spinning it. I stopped watching the parking lot. I stopped listening for Miss Carey's voice saying, "Elias, you have visitors." I stopped making excuses for people who had made a choice and built a whole quiet life around never having to reverse it. And I started becoming useful, because I had figured out, without anyone explaining it, that useful children get left alone in the best possible way. Useful children don't become targets. Useful children accumulate small amounts of trust, and trust, in a place like Millbrook, was its own kind of currency. I helped set tables. I helped younger kids with reading assignments. I shoveled the front walk in winter without being asked. I learned the schedule of every staff rotation and made sure I was never in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in whatever hours were left, I drew. Not chairs anymore. Tables, shelves, boxes, structures, things that fit together. Things with joints and seams and the satisfying logic of parts that couldn't exist without each other. I drew things that held. I left Millbrook House at 11 for my first foster placement. I want to be careful here, because the reality of the foster system is complicated. It is full of people who are doing difficult work with insufficient resources, and it is also full of cracks large enough to swallow a child whole if nobody's watching closely. I fell through some cracks. I also met some people who reached in after me. Both things are true. My first placement was with a couple in Raleigh. They had 2 biological kids and had been fostering for 4 years. They were not bad people in any dramatic sense. They were simply people for whom fostering had become, gradually, more logistical than personal. The extra room was clean, the food was regular. But there is a difference between a child being fed and a child being seen. Between a child being housed and a child feeling like they belong in the house. I ate at a table where the conversations happened around me rather than with me. I was introduced to relatives as the boy they were helping out for now. I attended a school where I was 3 weeks behind on a reading unit and nobody sat down to help me catch up. I was not mistreated. I was overlooked. After 7 months, the family decided they were taking a break from fostering. They told my caseworker, a new one by then, a man named Mr. Peel who drove a sensible sedan and always seemed slightly overwhelmed, that they needed to focus on their own children's schedules. I packed my green duffel bag. By then, I had added things to it. A small carving knife a staff member at Millbrook had helped me get from a craft supply room. A wooden block I'd started notching into a rough bird shape. My sketchbook, nearly full. I moved. The second placement was louder and more crowded. 5 foster kids, 2 biological kids, 1 overwhelmed woman named Sheila who genuinely tried and genuinely could not keep track of everything at once. Sheila was not cruel. She was depleted. There's a version of neglect that looks like being too tired to notice, and it does its own specific damage. Food ran out near the end of budget cycles. Shoes wore through and got replaced late. I shared a room with 2 other boys and learned to sleep through noise and to keep my sketchbook and carving block under my mattress because things disappeared if you left them visible. The school here was better, actually. My English teacher, a young man named Mr. Delaney who wore interesting ties and took student writing seriously, read my first assignment back and stopped the class to say it was an example of strong voice. I didn't know what strong voice meant in that context, but I recognized the sensation of being seen, even if just briefly, even if just for 1 paragraph. I held on to it. The third placement is harder to talk about. Her name was Vera. She kept a beautiful house, attended church regularly, was known in the community for her generosity. The story she told about herself was genuinely believed by most people who knew her. I want to be precise about what she did, because I think imprecision is how people like Vera stay protected. She never hit me. She never denied me food or clothing or medical attention in ways that would show up on a report. What she did was this. She studied you. She found the soft place, the thing you were still hopeful about, the part of yourself you hadn't yet armored, and she pressed on it with the perfect amount of pressure to cause maximum damage without leaving marks. She knew I still, despite everything, held some quiet hope that my family might eventually reach back. She used it. "You're still waiting for them, aren't you?" she said once while I was washing dishes. I didn't answer. She said, "Boys like you, boys who end up here, usually did something to make it hard. People don't leave easy children behind. Just something to think about." She said it gently, like she was doing me a favor by being honest. I scrubbed the pot I was holding until my arm ached because I did not want her to see my face. She said things like that regularly, quiet, plausible, framed as practical wisdom, things that burrowed in and lived there, things I spent years later pulling out one at a time and examining and learning to call by their real name: cruelty. I was 12. I reported nothing, because I already understood that adults in authority tended to protect the version of the story that required the least intervention. So I did what I had always done. I became more useful. I became quieter. I survived. The thing that changed my life did not arrive with music and golden light. It arrived in a cold garage behind a neighborhood community center in Durham on a Saturday morning when I was 13 because my caseworker had signed me up for a youth program without asking me whether I wanted to go, and I showed up because refusing would have caused complications I didn't have the energy for. The program was called Build Right. It was run by a man named Thomas Ayers. Thomas Ayers was 61 years old, built like a piece of furniture himself, solid, square, economical in movement. He was a retired Finnish carpenter who had spent 35 years building custom cabinetry and millwork for homes across North Carolina. He had the hands of someone who had spent decades doing careful work, scarred in places, certain in their movement, unhurried. He looked at the 6 of us who showed up that first Saturday and did not do the thing adults usually did with groups of foster and at-risk kids. He did not tell us we were valuable. He did not make us say affirmations. He did not explain the ways the program had changed lives. He said, "Pick up a piece of sandpaper. Start with this board. Grain runs that direction. Pay attention to the resistance." That was it. That was the introduction. I picked up the sandpaper. I felt the grain. I paid attention to the resistance. Something happened in that garage that I have spent years trying to explain accurately. It wasn't revelation. It wasn't sudden clarity. It was more like recognition. Like something in my hands had been waiting to be used this way, and the sandpaper and the grain and the specific mechanical logic of wood had found it. Wood has a language. Thomas Ayers spent the next 3 years teaching me to read it. He taught me how species mattered, how oak held different than walnut, how cherry moved in ways pine didn't, how the same joint built in 2 different woods would behave differently over time. He taught me to read grain before cutting so I wasn't fighting the material. He taught me the names of joints: mortise and tenon, dovetail, box joint, bridle, and the mechanical logic behind each one. He showed me that a well-made joint is both beautiful and honest. You can see exactly how it holds. He was not gentle in the sentimental way people sometimes are with damaged kids. He was rigorous. He made me take pieces apart and rebuild them. He made me sand work that I thought was finished until it met his standard, which was always slightly further than I thought I could reach. He told me when I was rushing, which I did often at first because rushing had become a way of not being inside the difficult moments too long. He said, "The wood knows when you're rushing. It shows up later. Always." He also said, "You have good hands, but hands are just the start. You need a mind that can hold a plan and change it at the same time without losing either. You have that too. Don't waste it." He said this not to make me feel good. He said it because he believed it was factually accurate, and Thomas Ayres did not say things he did not believe were factually accurate. I cannot explain to you, I have tried and failed many times, what it meant to be seen that clearly by someone with no obligation to see me at all. He was not my caseworker. He was not being paid to care about my future. He showed up every Saturday to that cold garage because he believed that young people in hard circumstances deserved access to a skill that was real and transferable and theirs in a way that couldn't be taken by a placement change or a school transfer or a family that changed its mind. He never once asked me why I was in the program. He never treated me as a story. He treated me as an apprentice. There was also a woman named Dr. Sandra Finch. She taught English and ran the creative writing elective at the high school I attended for 2 years, long enough, unusually, to actually develop a relationship with the teacher. Dr. Finch was the kind of educator who had clearly chosen the profession because she believed literature was a survival tool rather than an ornament. She had read everything and retained it all, and had strong opinions delivered with such calm precision that disagreeing with her required substantial preparation. She read the first essay I turned in, a short piece about building something, and kept me after class. She said, "You write like someone who has learned to see structure in things. That's harder to teach than style. Don't let anyone talk you out of that instinct." Then she asked if I wanted to join the writing workshop she ran on Wednesdays. I said yes, because I had learned by then to say yes to people who offered the right things. She never made my circumstances the subject of her investment in me. She was interested in what I made, not what had been made of me. When I wrote things that touched close to the truth of my own life, which I did, obliquely, in the way writers do, she read them seriously and responded to the writing rather than reaching for concern or sympathy. That restraint was a gift. It let me write the truth without it becoming therapy. By 16, I was spending every Saturday with Thomas. By 17, I was helping him with actual paid work, small repairs at first, then components of larger builds. He paid me a portion of his rate, which was far more than the volunteer stipend the program had technically offered, and told his clients I was his assistant, which was technically accurate, and also something more than accurate. I made my first piece of furniture alone when I was 17. A small side table, walnut, simple lines, mortise and tenon joints. I sanded it through 5 grits and finished it with an oil that brought the grain up like a landscape. Thomas walked around it twice. He pressed on the top. He crouched and looked at the joints. He stood up. He said, "Sell it." I said I didn't know how to sell furniture. He said, "Then learn. That's the next part." I sold it to a professor at Duke through a community board for $340. I held those dollars for a long time before I put them in my pocket. Not because of the amount, because they were the first proof that something I had made with my own hands, through my own patience and attention and discipline, had value to someone I had never met. Nobody had given me that value. Nobody could take it away. I aged out of the system at 18 with a duffel bag that had been replaced twice but was still, somehow, always a duffel bag, as if the universe had decided that was my vessel. I had a small savings account containing $2,100, which Thomas had made me build gradually from the work we'd done together. I had an acceptance to a 2-year applied arts program with a woodworking concentration at a community college in Durham. I had a reference letter from Thomas that, according to the admissions counselor, was the most direct and specific letter of recommendation she had read in 11 years. I also had Dr. Finch's personal email address and her instruction to use it if I was struggling with anything and didn't have someone to call. I was 18 years old, and those were the materials I had to start with. The apartment I found was a single room above a dry cleaning business. The smell came through the vents. The radiator made sounds at night like it was in genuine distress. The bed was a mattress on the floor. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like the state of Florida, which I decided to interpret as auspicious because the alternative was despair. I worked 3 part-time jobs in that first year: delivery driver, hardware store stock clerk, and occasional finish sanding work subcontracted through Thomas, who sent jobs my way when his own schedule was full. I attended class every day. I slept less than I should have. I ate badly. I was the happiest I had ever been. Not because the circumstances were good, because for the first time in my entire life, every single thing in my day was the direct result of a choice I had made. Nobody was moving me. Nobody was deciding my schedule or my placement or my school or my circumstances. I was cold because I chose a cheap apartment over a warm one, and I could change that when I had more money, and I would get more money by doing the work I was doing, and I was doing the work because I had chosen to. Autonomy is invisible when you've always had it. When you've spent years without it, it tastes like something you can't name. In my second year of the program, I met Jonah Reeves. Jonah was from East Baltimore, had a voice that carried across any room without effort, and treated woodworking with an almost irritating natural talent he then worked twice as hard as everyone else to refine anyway. He was funny in the dry, economical way of people who have survived things they'd rather not explain in detail. And we recognized something in each other immediately. Not the pain specifically, but the particular shape that a certain kind of childhood leaves on a person's posture and word choice and relationship with asking for help. We never talked directly about our histories for the first 8 months of knowing each other. Then one night, both of us working late on a project in the shop, he said without looking up, "You ever think about what it would have been like if somebody had stayed?" I kept sanding. I said, "Used to. Don't anymore. Too expensive." He nodded. He understood exactly what I meant. Jonah became my first real friend in adulthood, the kind who showed up when things broke, not with solutions necessarily, but with their actual physical presence, which is sometimes the only thing that means anything. Later, he became my first business partner, but I'm getting ahead of myself. After graduating, I worked 2 years for a small furniture studio in Durham that built high-end custom residential pieces. I learned production math. I learned client communication. I learned how to turn a design concept into a material and labor estimate without losing the margin that kept the lights on. I learned what I was worth in someone else's structure. Then I started to learn what I was worth in mine. The first pieces I sold under my own name came from Thomas's garage, which he still let me use on weekends. Jonah helped me build a website, which took 4 weekends and approximately 70 arguments about fonts. We priced conservatively. We photographed everything on a gray canvas drop cloth in decent natural light. The first 3 sales were to people we knew. The fourth was to a stranger in Charleston who had found us through a design blog. The fifth was to a restaurant in Chapel Hill that wanted 4 custom bar stools. The sixth was to a hotel in Asheville that wanted a desk for every room. By the time I was 26, we had moved out of Thomas's garage and into a shared workshop space. By 28, Jonah and I had signed a lease on a small commercial space in Durham and hired our first 2 employees. By 30, we had moved operations to Austin, Texas. Better space, lower overhead, a design community that responded to the aesthetic we were building, and had a team of 6 and a wait list that stretched 4 months. By 32, the warehouse in Austin held 11 employees, a flagship showroom, and a partnership with 3 interior design firms that accounted for a third of our annual revenue. By 34, the morning the phone started ringing, Second Grain had been featured in Architectural Digest, profiled in Texas Monthly, and invited to participate in a design fair in Milan that I had said yes to before I fully processed that I had been invited to a design fair in Milan. It started with a podcast. A design-focused show with a substantial following asked me for an interview. I had done interviews before, print, local radio, a few online features. I had a version of my story I gave to journalists. Grew up in the system, found woodworking, built a company. Clean, compact, professionally digestible. This host was different. She was not interested in the company. She was interested in the person. She asked about the work, yes, but she also asked about why the work. She asked what it meant to make things that lasted. She asked what I thought furniture had to do with the way people felt in their homes. She asked, eventually, what the difference was between a house and a home. I said, a house is structure. A home is the evidence that someone chose to stay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is that personal? And I said yes. I don't fully know what made me say it. Exhaustion, maybe. Or trust. She had created enough of it in that hour that honesty felt less dangerous than usual. Or maybe some part of me was simply tired of carrying a story that had shaped every single thing about me in a casing of professional polish. I told her about Millbrook House, about the green duffel bag, about the window I used to sit by, about Thomas, about building from zero, about what it meant to make things that held when the first decade of your life had been a lesson in the opposite. The episode went up on a Friday. By Sunday, it had been shared widely enough that a journalist from a national design publication reached out for a written profile. By the following Friday, the profile was live, with photographs, company history, revenue context, and the full story of my childhood in the kind of editorial detail that made the word abandoned appear in a pull quote. Abandoned. Sitting there in a font that cost the publication money to license. I stared at it for a long time. I did not feel shame. I felt, for the first time, that the true thing existed somewhere outside my own body. By the following Monday, my phone was ringing with numbers I didn't have saved. I let it ring. I went back to work, but I did not delete the voicemails. Late that night, after the shop was empty and Jonah had gone home, I sat at my workbench with a cold cup of coffee and listened. The first voicemail was from a number I ran through a reverse lookup before I pressed play. Marcus. His voice was deeper than any voice I had assigned to him in the versions I'd constructed in my head over the years. He sounded careful, deliberate. The way people sound when they have rehearsed something important and are trying not to let the rehearsal show. He said, "Eli, it's Marcus. I know there's a lot here. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I saw the article and I had to. I've thought about you a lot over the years, more than you probably believe. Please call me back. There's things I should have done differently. There's things I want to say." I listened to it twice. Then I listened to my mother's voicemail. Her voice was older, smaller somehow, like the years had compressed it. She said she was sorry. She said she had been sorry for a long time. She said she had followed what she could find about me online. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She only wanted me to know she had thought about me every single day. Every single day. I set my phone face down on the bench. I picked up a piece of scrap walnut and turned it over in my hands the way I always did, when I needed something real to hold. My father's voicemail came next. He sounded like a man who had rehearsed shorter than the others. He said he was sick. He said he didn't have a lot of time. He said there were things he needed to say before he ran out of time to say them. He did not say what the illness was. He did not say how much time. He said, "You deserved better than I gave you, Eli. That's the truth, and I'm done not saying it." Ruby sent a text that was 17 words long. "Eli, I only found out the truth 2 years ago. I've been sick about it. Please." I did not sleep well that night. Not because the messages weren't real. I believed some of them were, in their own compromised, incomplete way. But because knowing people are sincere doesn't mean knowing what to do with their sincerity. And because I knew, in the part of me that had been watching human behavior closely since I was 9 years old and had no choice but to read rooms accurately, that sincerity and motive were not always the same thing. I called Jonah before I called anyone else. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then he said, "What do you need to know before you decide anything?" I said, "Everything." He said, "Then let's find out." What we found was not surprising, but confirmation of what you suspected rarely feels smaller than the suspicion itself. My father was genuinely ill, a cardiac condition that had progressed significantly over the past 18 months. He was living alone in a small apartment in Greensboro. He had retired early and his savings were largely depleted. The timeline of his reaching out corresponded almost exactly with the profile being published. My mother had divorced for a second time 2 years earlier. The financial picture was difficult. She was living with a sister and working part-time. She had, as her voicemail claimed, followed what she could find about me online. She had also recently learned the extent of what I had built. Marcus had been laid off 8 months prior from a mid-level management position following a company restructuring. He was working contract work. His savings were thin. Ruby was the complicated one. Because the more I learned, the more it seemed she had genuinely not known the full truth of what had happened until she was an adult. My mother had told her for years that I had chosen to stay with a family program connected to the school. My father had let that story stand. Ruby had believed it, believed a sanitized version, until she was old enough and persistent enough to start asking questions that produced answers nobody had thought to hide carefully anymore. When she found out what had actually happened, she had stopped speaking to both of them for a period. She had tried multiple times to find me. That mattered. I am not going to pretend it didn't matter. I agreed to meet them. One meeting, my ground. The workshop after hours on a Thursday. I spent the 2 days before not preparing a speech. I had tried, and every version of it sounded either too performed or too raw, and I wanted neither. I wanted to be present and honest and clear. I wanted them to sit in the space I had built and understand that everything around them was the result of years of work nobody in that room had contributed to. I moved 4 chairs to the center of the showroom floor, not at a table, deliberately without a table between us. I wanted nowhere to hide. Jonah offered to be there. I said no. This was not a meeting that needed a witness. It needed something more uncomfortable than witnesses. It needed truth with nowhere to deflect to. They arrived together, which surprised me. I hadn't realized until that moment that they had coordinated. Marcus drove. My father was in the passenger seat. My mother and Ruby came in a separate car. I watched them through the showroom window. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, my father moving slowly, leaning on Marcus's arm, older than I had imagined him, somehow both larger in my memory and smaller in reality. My mother was pulling her coat tighter against the October air. Ruby was looking at the building with an expression I couldn't fully read. Marcus looked up and saw me through the window. We looked at each other through the glass. He looked away first. I unlocked the door and let them in. Nobody hugged me. I had not opened my posture in a way that invited it. They settled into the chairs, my father slowly, with effort. Marcus on his left, my mother and Ruby across. The workshop was lit the way I kept it after hours. Lower, warmer, the overhead floods off and the accent lighting on. The smell of it was wood and finish and metal, and the particular mineral smell of sharp tools kept clean. 3 pieces in progress were visible on the benches behind me. A cabinet door, a set of chair legs, a tabletop roughed out in quarter-sawn oak. Nobody looked at the pieces. They looked at me. I let the silence run for a while. Then I said, "I'm going to let each of you talk. I'm going to listen, then I'm going to speak, and I need each of you to not interrupt until I'm done." They agreed. My father spoke first. He talked about the pressure of losing his job, the shame of it, the drinking that followed. He named it directly, which I gave him credit for. He talked about the way the marriage had collapsed faster than either of them had managed, the way everything had happened simultaneously. He said he had told himself Millbrook was temporary, that he had genuinely believed, or needed to believe, that he was buying time to get stable enough to bring me home. He said the time passed and he got stable, but he never got brave enough. He said, "I told myself you were fine, that you were managing, that you were the kind of kid who would be okay, and I used that to let myself off the hook. I know that. I have known it for a long time." My mother talked about fear, about how the apartment she'd moved into with Marcus was barely big enough for the 2 of them, about how she had convinced herself that the system would be brief, that I would be back before any real damage was done. She talked about the way distance and time had made the truth harder to face rather than easier, how every month she didn't go back made going back feel more impossible. She started crying at some point. I noticed it. I did not move. Marcus talked about being a kid who didn't understand what was happening, and becoming an adult who did understand and still didn't do anything. He said that was the part he found hardest to justify, not the childhood, but the adulthood. He said, "I knew where you were by the time I was 16. I knew enough. I didn't do anything. I told myself you were probably fine. I told myself reaching out would just open things up. I was protecting myself. I know that." Ruby didn't have much to say at first. She said she had grown up with an incomplete story. She said when she found out the truth, she was 27 years old, and she had driven to a parking lot and sat there for 2 hours because she didn't know what to do with what she had learned. She said she was sorry for the years she didn't know. She said she was sorry for the years the others did know. She said, "You deserved someone who fought for you. I don't have an excuse. I just have a lot of grief about it." Then she stopped, and I began. I did not raise my voice. I want to say that clearly because I think sometimes people expect that confrontation sounds like breaking. It doesn't have to. I said, "I've listened. Now I want to tell you something that I need you to actually hear, not just absorb politely and then manage the way you've managed things before." I talked about Millbrook House. I told them about the window, the parking lot, the way I sat there watching for a car I recognized. I told them about Darnell telling me they always say that. I told them about counting weekends. I told them about the trash bags full of my clothes. I told them about Vera, every careful, quiet thing she had done. I told them about the nights I held my fist against my mouth because I had understood, even at 9, that expressing need in an institutional setting made you a target. I told them about Thomas, about what it had meant to be taught by someone with no obligation to teach me, about the first piece of furniture I sold for $340 and what those dollars meant in the context of a life where nothing had come from anyone who was supposed to give it to me. I told them about aging out at 18 with a duffel bag and $2,100 and 2 people's contact information and no family to call. I told them what it took to build everything they were sitting in the middle of, and then I told them what I had found out in the week before this meeting. I told them I knew about my father's illness and his finances. I knew about my mother's divorce and her situation. I knew about Marcus's job loss. I knew about the timing, the profile, the outreach, the correspondence between those 2 events. I said, "I'm not saying you don't feel what you're expressing. I believe most of what you've told me tonight is real. I am saying that love that requires an audience, love that activates when your survival needs it rather than when mine did, is not the kind of love I need to build my life around." Nobody spoke. I went on. "You did not lose me. I was not misplaced. I was a decision. And that decision was made by adults who had other options, who used the word temporary to make themselves comfortable with something permanent. I lived with the consequences of that decision for years. I still carry them. And now you are asking me to incorporate that back into my life on a timeline that serves your needs." My father said, "I'm not asking you for anything." I looked at him. I said, "The voicemail mentioned your illness in the 3rd sentence. Marcus mentioned in his 2nd call that you were struggling with medical costs. You may not have asked directly, but you came here with needs and you dressed them in apology. I need you to be honest with yourself about that, even if you can't be honest with me about it yet." He didn't respond. My mother said, "So that's it? There's nothing? We lose you again?" I said, "You don't lose me again. You lost me once. What happens now is a choice I make about who I let into my life and under what conditions. Those are not the same thing." I looked at Ruby. I said, "You're different. Not because you're exempt from all of this, but because what you didn't know at 9, I can hold differently than what they knew at 40. I don't have an offer of a relationship for you right now, but I have an openness that I don't have for the others. Slowly, honestly, with no weight of obligation attached. She nodded. She was crying and nodding. That was the right response. Then I said the thing I had been building toward without knowing it until the moment arrived. I said, I want to tell you all something. Not to be cruel, because I think it matters more than the apology. I am sitting in front of you as someone who was taught to work by a man who barely knew me, who was taught to write by a woman who had no reason to invest in me, who was kept together by a friend who chose to stay when staying cost him something, who was loved by a partner who learned what I came from and didn't use it against me and didn't perform concern and didn't make it the most important thing about me. None of those people shared my blood. Every single one of them stayed. And the people who shared my blood left and built a life and believed the word temporary long past the moment it stopped being true. That is not a sentence I say to punish you. It is a sentence I say because I think you need to understand the full cost of what you decided, not so that you feel worse, but so that you don't get to leave here having revised it into something easier. I stood up. I said, I hope you get the help you need. I hope your health improves, and I mean that literally and without cruelty. I hope Marcus finds work that's right for him. I hope you all find a way to carry what you've done without it crushing you, because living crushed is not useful for anyone. But I am not the answer to the problem. I am not the soft landing. I am not the inheritance. I am the person you left behind. And I have built myself into someone extraordinary, not for you, not despite you, just for myself. And that is mine. That belongs to no one in this room but me. My father cried, the quiet kind. Marcus pressed his hands together and stared at the floor. My mother said, I know I don't deserve anything. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that not a day, I said, I believe you. And it wasn't enough. That was the hardest sentence of the night, because I believed her completely. And it still wasn't enough. Those two things were both true at the same time. That's what nobody tells you about confrontation with the people who hurt you. The truth doesn't resolve the wound. It just refuses to add more weight to it. They left. Ruby stopped at the door and looked back at me. She didn't say anything. I nodded. She nodded back. That was the beginning of the only thing from that night that has developed into something real. Slowly, carefully, with honesty as the entrance requirement. We talk now. Not often, not easily, but truthfully. And in this case, truthfully is everything. 2 months after that night, Thomas Ayers came to Austin to see the flagship showroom. He walked through it the way he walked around finished pieces at 17. Slow, observant, pressing here, crouching there, taking the full measure of things without saying anything premature. When he was done, he stood in the center of the showroom floor and looked at me. He said, "You built something worth building." He did not say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't need to. I knew. Second Grain now runs a paid apprenticeship program for young people aging out of foster care. We partner with a Durham nonprofit that Thomas helped us connect with. We offer 12-week intensive shop training and, for graduates who want it, a path into contract work or employment with us. We have graduated 11 apprentices so far. 4 of them work for us full-time. Jonah runs that program with a ferocity that regularly makes vendors uncomfortable and social workers emotional. I run the design side and the production floor and spend Tuesday afternoons working with whoever's at the bench, because I remember what it cost Thomas to give me those Tuesday afternoons. And I have calculated that giving them back is the most honest thing I can do with what he gave me. The workshop is quiet this time of morning. The October light comes in through the high windows and lands on the quarter-sawn oak tabletop I've been building for the past 3 weeks. A dining table, 8 feet long, with breadboard ends and hand-cut mortise and tenon joints, and the kind of finish that takes multiple days and refuses to be rushed. My hands are steady. The wood is good. The work is honest. There are things I want to say before I close this. Not lessons in the clean, packaged sense. I've been in enough rooms full of people who offer clean lessons about messy things, and I don't want to do that to you. Just true things, from a man who spent a long time learning them. Being left does not mean you were leavable. It means the people who left you had limitations larger than their love for you. Those are not the same thing. I know it does not feel that way when you are 9 years old on a plastic chair in a lobby that smells like disinfectant and old carpet. But it is true, and I need you to hear it clearly. What happened to you is not evidence of your worth. It is evidence of their failure. The people who stayed without obligation are family. Blood is a starting point, not a completion. Thomas Ayers never had to show up on a Saturday. Jonah never had to drive 4 hours when I called him at 2 a.m. the week we almost lost our first commercial lease. Dr. Finch never had to keep my email address past the semester I was her student. They did those things because they chose to. That is the only definition of family that has ever made sense to me. Choose the people who choose you. Protect those people. Be that person for someone else when you have the capacity to be. Forgiveness is not a gift you give the people who hurt you. It is a decision you make about the weight you are willing to carry. I have forgiven some things, not all things, not on anyone else's timeline. And forgiveness, in my case, has not meant re-entry. It has meant that when I think about certain people, I am no longer consumed. That's what it means for me. It might mean something different for you. Both are allowed. The last thing. To anyone who is inside the hard part right now, not the resolution, not the distance, not the chapter where success has made the story easier to tell, but the actual hard part. The window, the parking lot, the waiting. The way the whole world moves forward while you sit still inside something terrible. I need you to know that the life on the other side of this is real. I need you to know it is yours, not earned. You do not earn a right to be okay. You were already worth a life before any of this happened, but built, carefully, over time, with whatever materials arrive. Some of those materials will be skills. Some will be strangers who become the people who stay. Some will be mornings when the light comes through high windows and lands on good wood and your hands are steady and the work is honest. That is enough. That has always been enough. Build something that holds. The rest will follow.